It's Listen In with KNN, the sports sound of the district. Today, we welcome a former NFL veteran who is tackling the stigma of addiction and mental illness. He spent all 10 of his seasons as a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. During his time, he became addicted to painkillers while playing in the NFL, but recovered through the help of a rehab facility. He's the founder of Pro Athletes in Recovery, which strives to help athletes overcome drug abuse and addiction. It's Randy Grimes, and he joins this live stream broadcast of Listen In with KNN right now with your host, Kelsey Nicole Nelson. It's Listen In with KNN, the sports sound of the district. We bring you the biggest guests, great analysis, and the hottest sports stories in the nation's capital and beyond. And we bring it to you live. Welcome to this live stream broadcast of Listen In with KNN. Here's your host, Kelsey Nicole Nelson.
Hello, everyone, and happy Saturday. Welcome to another live stream edition of Listen In with KNN, presented right here on our home station, Fox Sports Radio, 96.9 FM and 1340 AM. With me, your host, Kelsey Nicole Nelson. Now, I know we're getting back into spring football, but I know we're all still reeling from Super Bowl and all the greatness that it had. And then, of course, we're preparing for the NFL draft, right? If you love football, and you want it year-round. So I decided to bring in somebody that knows the game pretty well. And that Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that just won, he knows that pretty well, too, having played for them. We're going to talk the latest and greatest in football. He has such an amazing story with how he's transformed and changed not only his life, but the lives of others. And that's what the show is about, connecting sports and society and all that great stuff. And of course, we're going to have fun as always. So helping me kick off today's show is none other than former Tampa Bay Buccaneers center Randy Grimes. He is also the founder of Athletes in Recovery. And so without further ado, please help me welcome Randy to the show. Randy, how are you today? Uh-oh, Randy, we have you on mute. Technology, right, Randy? There we go. Uh-oh, Randy, we're still not hearing you. All right, let me try to bring Randy back in. And now you're on mute, Randy. We're going to figure this out because it's 2021 and we have technology. All right, Randy, for some reason, we're still not hearing you. We want to hear all the great stuff that you got to say. And I know, look, I promise you, while me and Randy did a test run, he is going to be set and ready, but we're just making sure that we can hear him. Okay, so we can talk about all the great stuff that is football, all the great work that he's doing, and so much more. All right, Randy, we're still not hearing you for some reason. I'm going to try to take Randy off, and I'm going to bring Randy back on so we can get the show started. But this is the great thing about live. Stuff happens, and we keep going with the flows and punches. Can you hear us, Randy? All right, but we cannot hear you at all, Randy. All right, so while Randy is figuring that out, I will make sure that we touch on things. We're going to talk about him playing football at Baylor University, the Athletes in Recovery, and we're going to talk to Randy about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers winning the Super Bowl and his thoughts and feelings and beliefs. But while we get him back, I want to make sure that everyone knows, again, you can watch the show live every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time And every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to make sure Randy is able to get back in on the show. So you all can start asking your questions. And we talk football and spring football and so much more. Also talking about some of those Baylor commits that went on over. And of course, with Randy, we're talking about just the greatness of what he played. 10 years in the National Football League. Very long, lengthy career. We'll talk about just the power of that center position. All right, we're getting Randy back. We're going to see if we can do it this time. There we go. Now we have you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly. Look, it's just like in football, Randy. If it doesn't work the first time, you got another play to get it right, right?
That's right. It was the earbuds. But anyway, thank you for having me today. Sorry about that mix-up. And
yeah, no problem.
I'm grateful to be here. Thanks.
I'm excited to have you, Randy. So where are you right now? Where are you currently?
I'm in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Oh, nice.
I'm in paradise.
Yeah, you are. I was going to say that. I love how you said it with a little attitude. We're a little jealous here in the DMV, Randy. It's not that warm, but hopefully you'll bring some sunshine here. And Randy, to kick off the show, I like to start with my guests. How are you feeling? How are you doing? Obviously, it's been a crazy year. We were all impacted by COVID-19. At least now we're starting to see more people get vaccinated. But how have you been? How's your family been? Have you all been able to keep safe and healthy?
You know, it's been a crazy year, not only for us, but for everybody, especially people in recovery, because we haven't been able to get out, get to meetings. Yeah. Thank goodness for virtual. And, you know, I'm able to stay in touch with, you know, my friends and everybody in recovery, but also my sponsees. Nice. And everybody that I sponsor, and also my sponsors. So, you know, where there's a will, there's a way. And, you know, we're in a pandemic within a pandemic, because we already had this huge substance abuse, mental health issue going on out there. And then all of a sudden this virus hits. And what's the one thing they tell you to do is the one thing we tell people not to do, and that's isolate. So it's been a rough year on everybody, but I think we're on the downhill side, I hope.
Yeah.
And we're close to getting back to life as we know it. So
yeah, life as we know it. That's going to be so strange for a lot of us, Randy. Like, what was life as we know it? A new normal, right? I mean, I think, you know, some things I think are going to stay in place. For instance, I think some people might just continue to wear face masks, even hopefully once COVID-19 is gone. You might feel differently on public transportation, being really close to people. Like, everything you do, I think, is just in a different perspective. And I definitely want to talk on, like you said, people overcoming addiction, because you're right. I mean, isolation was, I think, hard for everyone, but especially when it's something that you're not supposed to do, to have to go through so many things alone. And I think about people, Randy, in smaller houses or apartments, right? And you're confined to your small walls, or if you live in somewhere where you're not in a city and there's not lots to do, you know, it's COVID-19 has just been a crazy transition, I think, for so many of us, Randy. So I definitely want to touch on that with you. But I'm glad you're healthy. I'm glad you're well. I'm glad you're in West Palm Beach enjoying the palm trees and the good weather and so much more.
Right. I'm not complaining at all. If hey, you got to isolate somewhere, this is the place to be.
I'm not blaming you, Randy. Look, I'm telling you, you might just get some people to go on some of these airline sales and book their tickets to West Palm Beach, because they're going to want to be like you with some sunshine. Nothing wrong with that. And talking about sunshine, you're kind of fun from the sunshine, being from Tyler, Texas. I thought this was pretty cool, Randy. Your birthday is July 20th. I'm July 17th. So we're both Cancers. So you know this is a great show.
Yeah, I'm from Tyler, Texas, right outside of Dallas. And, you know, my life growing up was Friday night lights, football, you know, pasture parties, pickup trucks, girls. I mean, football was religion in East Texas, and right. Still is. And, you know, that's how I grew up. Everything's centered around football. And, you know, football just came easy for me. You know, it was something I didn't have to work real hard at. It came easy for me. And I'm grateful. I had a great upbringing. You know, I had the great parents and brother and sister in the world. And you know, I'm grateful for that upbringing that I had.
I love that. Tyler, Texas. Again, it's not hard to see how you got into football. You're from Texas, Randy. So what else would you play? You had to play football. And it's great to hear that it came easy for you. And I'm curious off that question, was center always the position for you, Randy, or did you move around growing up different positions and then finally make your way to playing that center position?
Yeah, and I was smaller in high school. I didn't really start putting on a lot of weight till my senior year. So that's when they moved me to offensive line, moved me to center. And, you know, I had the opportunity to go anywhere back in. You remember the old Southwest Conference? Yeah. I had the opportunity to go anywhere in the Southwest Conference back then, but I chose Baylor I wanted to play for the great Grant Taft. I had a sister there. And being the good Southern Baptist that I am, I wanted to make my mama happy by going to Baptist University. So, 1979, I signed a scholarship to play with Baylor, and I played with greats like Mike Singletary and Walter Abercrombie and Frank Pollard and Greg Hawthorne and Ronnie Bo-Lee. And, it was the best decision that I ever made. I met my wife the very first day, my freshman year.
Wow.
We went out that night, and then I married her after my junior year.
Wow, love at first sight.
No idea why we got married, because neither one of us had anything. We were just in love, and we were gonna live the All-American dream. She was gonna teach, I was gonna coach.
I love it.
We just things, but like I said, football came easy for me, and I had a great college career. And after my junior year, and I saw these scouts coming around looking at other seniors, I started thinking maybe this is something I could continue to do. So I really got serious about my senior year, and life was just different then because I was married. I wasn't living in a dorm running around like crazy all the time. My teammates. And it was time to be serious, and that's what happened that whole senior year.
That's wonderful to hear. And just, of course, playing with all those greats at Baylor, I'm sure it was surreal. Probably not in the moment. You guys were all just doing something special. And, of course, we all still think about Baylor University and that great football program that it built. It's great to hear how you got to that center position. And talking about Baylor, now I don't know if you heard the good news, Randy, but they just got Alabama quarterback, Zach Pyron. He just
I didn't know that. So that's awesome.
And we have to go back to – go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, no, that's great news. I thought you were going to congratulate me on us winning the Big 12 basketball, boys and girls.
Baylor University doing big things, like we're recruiting live on the show. You guys heard it here first. Great things happening at Baylor University with sports. And Randy, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You said pasture parties. All right, so break that down for us from like the suburbs or the city. What's a pasture party like, Randy? What were y'all doing back then?
I won't get into details about what we were doing in high school because we probably shouldn't have been doing it. But, we would get together and people's pasture. And, it was away from everything. It was away from all the stress. And, it was just a great opportunity for everybody to get out there, have fun together. And the only lights we had were the headlights of your cars. And those are some of the greatest memories. And that's the thing, even when I go back for reunions, those pasture parties are what we talk about all the time.
The legendary pasture parties, right? We got to put that in italics. That's so great to hear. And you touched on playing at Baylor. You touched on scouts coming, and that led you to being selected in the second round of the 1983 NFL draft, number 45 overall. Randy, take me back to that moment. What was it like getting your name called, knowing you're going to go on to play professionally, right? A guy that you said you were small to play football at first, then you go to Baylor, scouts are there, and next thing you know, you're getting drafted to the National Football League.
And this is back before they had green rooms and nationally televised drafts and bringing guys on stage and private jets and flying them in. And, before all the big agents were out, recruiting kids. This was back when you sat by your telephone. Me and my wife sat by my telephone in my little, it was a little duplex that we lived in. And, I had heard I was going to get drafted by St. Louis, who was drafting right before us. And then I had heard I was going to get drafted by the Cowboys. But when that phone rang, and I really had no idea who it was because there was no way to keep up with it, like there is now. And I remember hearing John McKay's voice on the other end. And it was real short and sweet. It was just, hey, Randy, we just drafted you in the second round. Congratulations. I'll see you tomorrow. Click. And I was like, whoa, wait, coach, I don't even know where Tampa is. Where's Tampa Bay? I'm an East Texas kid who never even seen the ocean. So, but I did know that Tampa had gone to the playoffs the year before. That was the strike shortened year in 1982. So I
Right.
was excited to be going not only to a playoff caliber team, but to the seaside community of Tampa, Florida, to not only start my career in pro football, but to start my family and everything else. So I was excited.
Yeah. And you go on, you talked about it. You get picked in that 1983 draft class was so special, Randy. Look at the smile coming on, which I'm sure you know. I mean, so many just big.
It's the greatest of all time.
And we're talking about quarterbacks in this year's draft class, which we can touch on, but talk about the quarterbacks in that draft class. John Elway, right, taken first overall. Stanford,
Reno, and all the Todd Blackwood, all the great players that were in that draft, and it was loaded with quarterbacks, and you know, I give people a hard time all the time because they're always saying what was the greatest draft of all time, but there's no doubt that 1983 draft was the greatest draft of all time.
Yeah, you just said the big.
Not because I was in it, but.
I was going to say because Randy Grimes was in it, but those names help too, right? They help.
But also the first year of the USFL draft, so they took a lot of players that year away. So it was a real confusing year. You didn't know what to do. Luckily I was drafted by New Jersey Generals. I could have been Trump, could have been the boss, but I could have played with Herschel, but I had a gut feeling that I needed to wait it out and stick with the NFL, and I'm glad I did. I wouldn't go back and change anything.
That's great to hear, because obviously you had a 10-year career, Randy, in the National Football League. That's huge, right? But we know the average for most players is very short, right? You're lucky to play a couple years. So just talk about what it was like playing in Tampa Bay, your career there, and just how you continue to grow and develop and be successful on the football field.
Yeah, and I played with such greats there too. I was able to play with Doug Williams was there when I first got there, but then he left before camp started. But I got to play with the greats like Hugh Green and Leroy Selman and Jerry Bell and Dave Logan and just Vinny Testaverde, Steve DeBerg. We had such great players there, and we were always just one player short. I'd always come to camp every year, and even though my best year was 6-10, I would come into camp every year thinking that was the year. We were just that close. We were one game or one player or one injury away from making it or not. And, I just never had that year, but I had a great career. And Tampa Bay was the decade that I was there, we were a revolving door of not only players, but coaches and front office people. In my 10 years, I had 5 different head coaches, 6 different offensive line coaches, and probably 10 different quarterbacks that got up underneath me, and probably 2 or 3 different general managers. So that whole decade was a revolving door, and it seems like the only consistent thing about the Bucs back then was Randy Grimes at center. I seemed to be able to survive every change or thing that we had there.
And that's huge, especially at that position, right? And it just shows that you were able to play through adversity, right? No matter what else was going on, you were able to do your job. Quarterbacks trust you, the front office trusts you, and everybody else trusts you, Randy. So that's great to hear. You talked about some of those big names. And then you see the Buccaneers today, Super Bowl champion Buccaneers, Randy. So I know this year was great. Let's talk about that. First off, I know you watched the Super Bowl this year, but seeing what Tom Brady, Bruce Arians, and this whole crew did to win the Super Bowl, what did that mean to you as a former player?
Well, and back when they signed him, I didn't know how much he still had in the tank. I didn't know how much he was going to bring physically down here. I knew he was going to sell a lot of tickets, and had it not been for the virus, he would have. But I didn't know physically what he was going to be able to bring down. But I did know that he was going to bring that air of confidence and stability and that tough attitude of I've been there, I've done it. And as a player, you want to go back to a huddle. You want to see somebody with that attitude, with that face, with that air of confidence in the huddle, because that changes everything. And that alone makes him worth every penny that they're paying him. And because he's brought a culture to that team and those players that they'll be able to take anywhere. And now it's part of that team, and that never say die, never give up. That brotherhood is so important, and now they have it because of Tom Brady.
Yeah, Tom Brady's special. Hey, TB12, he's taught us to believe. A lot of naysayers, a lot of doubters, but now he's able to throw Lombardi's, almost dropping in the water, and none of us can complain because it's Tom Brady, and of course it gets to the other boat, and of course it's okay, and I think that's just great to see. And now we're even talking about, Randy, maybe they can repeat. Is this something that you can see happening with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
If they can keep the core of that group together, then I don't see anybody stopping them. But, I also said that about Kansas City last year, and you just never know. For the fact that the Bucs went on the road and won those 3 big playoff games and were able to come back and win at home, the biggest game of all, that's going to be hard to repeat, but hopefully they won't put themselves in that situation. They'll have more home games. And, there's some great teams. The Chiefs are going to always be around. There's going to be some great competition. And next year is going to be even harder because everybody's going to be gunning for them.
Right, exactly right. All eyes are on them. And look, we all love Tom Brady, but people aren't ready to see Tom Brady get yet another ring, right? Everyone's coming for him. Like that you talked about those road playoff games is one of those games where right here in Washington, right, since we're based in Washington, our Washington football team, and I'd say, Randy, they gave Tom Brady and Buccaneers just a little bit of work, right, to get that win, which I think many thought would be an easy game. So I got to get your thoughts on that Washington football team versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers playoff game, Randy.
But, that's that never say die attitude, and the fact that they were never out of it because Tom Brady was at quarterback.
Right.
That's what he brought to the team. And maybe that's something that Washington doesn't have yet, or something that the Saints didn't have yet, or something that maybe Green Bay had lost, but in the end, Tom Brady was the victor. And really, he didn't play that great in a lot of those games. And, he had some turnovers, but he was able to get that team in the right position to win the game when it counted. And that's what it's all about.
Exactly what it's all about. And talking about what it's all about, the Buccaneers have also been praised off the field for their moves, having all Black coordinators, Randy, which I know you know, having female assistant coaches. I mean, just talk about winning on and off the football field, talking about diversity winning. What does that mean to you to see Bruce Arians lead such a diverse staff, which hopefully will be a mold for the rest of the National Football League to follow?
Well, and I hope this is contagious. I think the Bucs have done a great job at diversity, and really, I probably should give more credit to Coach Arians, for doing most of that. And he's always been that way. He was like that when he was out at Phoenix, and I commend him for making those kind of moves. And those are things. These are highly qualified, talented people that have the opportunity, and they should be given the opportunity. And when they stepped up and they proved it. They had great years. And so, I'm just excited about the diversity that we have at the Bucs, and hopefully that will spread league wide. And
that's what we hope, right? That's what we hope. We're always trying to be forward thinking. The league can always evolve and always make positive change. And I think it's great to see that Tampa Bay is kind of setting that standard, setting that example. And then I'm sure you heard also the good news that just broke, Randy, about Maya Shaka being named the first Black female official for the National Football League. So first, did you hear that news? And secondly, if so, how do you feel about that?
No, I'm getting all my news from you today.
Yeah, I'm breaking it to you, Randy. It's a new
I'm
time.
calling you every day and get my news first from you.
I got you.
I'm all about it. I'm all about the diversity. The game is the game, and I'm just excited about the changes that are being made on and off the field in the league. We've still got a long way to go, though. And there's a lot more that we need to be doing, especially on the mental health side of it, and we'll get into that. But the league has there's a lot of work that we still needs to be done.
Right, and it's always about making that progress, right? And hopefully right? We'll make all the positive strides. But I think we're continuing to kind of get to that point. And you talk about the mental health front. So let's get into that. I talked about you playing in the National Football League for 10 years. But during this time, as I understand it, you began using just powerful prescription opioids, right, to help manage your chronic injuries. Because football is a sport, right? We see injuries all the time. And of course, usually this is anybody that goes to the doctors. You can be quick to get those pain pills, but then you can get hooked on them, Randy. So just kind of talk about that process. How did it start, Randy? And then, when did you know that you needed help? When did it get to a point where you had to just call out and ask for help and ask for support?
Well, I can remember the first thing that I learned when I got to that locker room in Tampa in 1983 was that football was not a game anymore. It was now a job,
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing I learned, and I still remember having this conversation. Leroy Selman had a locker right next to mine, and I still remember having this conversation with him my rookie year. And I remember him telling me, Randy, you do whatever you have to stay out on that field, because if you're not out in your position, somebody else was going to be. And he said, you don't want to be that guy who gets the reputation of always being on the injury report, or always being back in the training room, being worked on by the trainers, or always on the doctor's report, or in line to see the doctor, or always missing practice. You don't want to get that reputation, because that was a reputation you were never going to get away from in what was sure to be a short NFL career if you did get it. So what did that look like for me? It meant taking handfuls of pain pills every day to practice through the injuries, to practice through the pain, to play in games through the injuries and pain. And this is back in an era where we used to beat the crap out of each other all week long. It was that junction boy mentality where if you don't practice hard, you're not going to play hard. We would practice so hard all week, we just barely had enough left in the tank to play on Sunday. But, that's where a lot of the injuries would happen in practice. And I never understood that mentality. Why would you beat up your greatest commodities, which are your players, before the Sunday game? But, I would take these handfuls of pain pills during the day and then handfuls of sleeping pills at night to get to sleep through the throbbing pain. And, I justified it back then because I looked at it like a necessary evil. I wanted to be the best center that ever played the game. I wanted to play the game forever. I wanted to be all pro and get that next big contract. I wanted to feed my family playing football. So those are ways that I justified it. And, I'm getting it from team doctors, so it must be okay. Or I'm getting it from the team trainers, so it must be okay. Or my teammates are handing it to me, so it must just be the culture of the NFL. So these are ways that I justified what I was calling a necessary evil, but what it really was a full-blown addiction. And, that addiction progressed to the point to where the last 2 years of my career, I was taking so much medication before the games, and that I was playing the entire games in blackouts. I would be home on the couch at 11 or 12 o'clock at night after a 1 o'clock football game that I had played that Sunday afternoon. And I'd be all beat up and scratched up and fingernails all torn up and dehydrated and everything that you are after an NFL football game. And I didn't remember playing any of it. And I was the center. I was the guy making line calls. I was the guy changing blocking schemes. I was the guy getting other players going in the right direction, blocking the right guys. And I was doing all of this in a blackout. And that was what that necessary evil progressed to over those 8 years that I was doing that while I played for the Bucs.
Wow. And I appreciate you touching on that. And again, I know it's hard, right? But like you said, back then there's that pressure to succeed. And even now, right? Like you said, you don't want anybody to come in, take your job possibly. And like you said, you're trying to feed and provide for your family. And I think a lot of times you justify things, right? And so in your mind, it was right. And like you said, you were getting it from people you trust. It's team doctors, right? It's not a foreigner giving it to me. It's somebody who, of course, wants this for my benefit. But lo and behold, like you said, that grew into an addiction. And as I understand it, Randy, it wasn't until addiction claimed the life of one of your close friends that you found the courage to begin to ask for help. So what was that process like? It's not easy, I'm sure, to first off admit you have a problem and then reach out to others for that problem and trust them to help you solve that problem.
Well, and it's that old warrior mentality, especially us athletes, military. Well, a lot of guys have it, because that's the way we were raised. That's the way our fathers raised us, because that's the way their fathers raised them, where big boys don't cry. You pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get back in the huddle and shut up. You don't complain about aches and pains and injuries and all that. So, that mentality still exists today within the league. And, no matter how much I go out and tell people that it's okay to not be okay, there's still that pride and that ego and guilt and shame if they do raise their hand and ask for help. So, there's a lot to combat against. But, I can remember my last coach was Sam Weish, and it was after the 1992 season. And back then, we would, after the last game, if you weren't going to the playoffs, you'd come in on the next day after the game, you'd clean out your locker, you'd watch the film from the day before, you'd have an exit meeting, and then you would pretty much leave until minicamp started again in the spring. Now it's more of a full-time year-round job, but I can remember Sam Weish walking by my locker after that last game, putting his hand on my shoulder and saying, "Randy, we won't be needing your services anymore."
Wow.
And I remember thinking, wow, is that how it ends? All the blood, sweat, and tears that I've left on football fields all over this country since fourth grade, and that's how it ends. The fifth head coach that I've had, who really has no loyalties to me, who I really don't even like, who I only played for 1 year, puts his hand on my shoulder and really doesn't even look me in the eye. It just tells me as he's walking by, and that's how it ends. And I don't know how I thought it would end. It's not like I expected to have a parade or a street named after me, but I just thought it would end that way. And I remember raking everything out of my locker into a black trash bag and walking out the back door. And Randy Grimes, the football player, didn't exist anymore. And the reason I bring that up is because I already had this rage and addiction going that I was calling a necessary evil. And now the fact that I didn't have football anymore, that I didn't have that uniform to put on anymore, that I didn't have that locker room to sit in anymore, that I didn't have that playbook in front of me every Monday. The fact that that's gone was just throwing gasoline on an already raging fire. And I didn't transition well. I did not leave the game and find my purpose. Transitioning out of the NFL was really hard for me for many, many years. And not only were the injuries just getting worse, the chronic pain was just getting worse. My tolerance to the medication was just getting higher. I needed more and more. And now I had all these self-esteem issues and self-worth and trying to find myself and who am I when I'm not a football player. It just was a spiral of insanity for the next 20 plus years. And it was the death of, people ask me, well, what was your bottom? And it seems like every bottom I had a trap door. I always went lower, But the spring and summer of 2009, I'd had a series of seizures. I'd had a series of car wrecks. I'd had a series of emergency room visits. My daughter wouldn't let me see my first grandchild because I wasn't fit to be around him. My wife, she didn't leave me, but she had to get away from me because she was just loving me to death and she couldn't do it anymore. And then also my good friend Tom McHale, who I played next to for many years. And he was out there doing the same thing that I was doing, self-medicating his injuries he got while he played with the Bucs. And one morning he just didn't wake up. So that whole perfect storm was happening in the spring and summer of 2009. And finally in September of 2009, I finally put my hand up and said, listen, I can't do this. Of course, I'm one of those guys that had to lose everything, before I finally got past that pride and that ego. And, I thought I was the only one out there doing what I was doing. And so there was so much guilt and shame. And, I can remember thinking that, I was a second round draft pick. I was a college All-American. I married my cheerleader, sweetheart wife and had 2 great kids, Bowler. I was 88 NFL Man of the Year. And here I am sleeping in the floor of an abandoned house with no utilities, all because of that necessary evil. And that's what it had come to. And so I finally put my hand up and asked for help.
Wow. And again, I know that's hard. And you talked about just the transition out of football. You get used to something. You talked about playing it since since we're fourth grade. And then all of a sudden, something that you love is taken away from you so quickly. And I think a lot of us, Randy, we don't think about the end, right? We're enjoying the moment and nothing wrong about that. But when the end comes, it's not always being prepared for that. And then all of a sudden, like you said, you are addicted to something. Now you're not playing football and you have all these different issues going on and your body's trying to find a way to kind of cope, right? And for you, it sounds like, you stayed addicted to these pills and it got so low to a low bottom. But I'm glad that you touched on finally asking for help. And as I understand it, Randy, you described it as a burning bush experience, right? You talk about 2009, that autumn, and then you got admitted to the behavioral health of Palm Beaches, a South Florida drug treatment facility. So talk about what that transition was like, right? Because I think a lot of us hear these things, Randy, but we don't really know, what that process is like. So you're finally asking for help. You get admitted to the facility. How did that process go? And then talk about your time in the facility and just how you were able to kind of start to overcome this addiction.
Yeah, and I can remember that car picking me up at the Fort Lauderdale airport. I flew out there from Houston, and I can remember thinking as I was sitting in the back of that car, I still had another hour drive north to West Palm Beach, and I can remember thinking how dirty and smelly and beat up and disgusting that car was, because I was in the back seat of it, and about halfway up the road there, I realized that the reason it was like that is because it picked up people like me all day and took them to treatment. And I was so sick and broken. And when I pulled up to that treatment center, somebody opened the car door and I just fell out. And there was about another 30 or 40 feet to get through the door. And, I just crawled on my all fours that last 30 or 40 feet through the door. But you know what? I finally was desperate. I finally had that gift of desperation that I needed to get my life back. And I'm a pretty tough guy. I thought I was. I've been in a lot of battles and won most of them. You don't get to stay in the NFL for 10 years unless you're winning stuff. But crawling through that door that night was the toughest thing and the biggest battle that I'd ever had. And, I can still remember, I don't remember much from that night, but I remember somebody saying, Randy, in order to get this, you've got to have the desperation of a drowning man. And, the reason that had such an impact on me that night, even today, was because my most vivid childhood memory as an 8-year-old kid in Tyler, Texas, was falling off one of those little paddle boat things, those little one-man paddle boats that, and I got my feet caught up in something in the bottom of the lake. And I still remember how desperate I was, how I clawed at the water, how I was fighting and kicking and screaming underwater to get back to the surface. I'll never forget that desperation. And that's what it was like that night, and I was desperate to get my life back. And you talk about the burning bush moment. It was exactly 2 weeks into the process. I came in and I detoxed for a month. My body was so toxic that nobody really wanted to even take me. And the fact that behavioral health at Palm Beaches did take me, they were going to take my detox really slow so I wouldn't have another seizure or another episode. So exactly 2 weeks into that process, I was sitting at a picnic table on the campus, and it was at 8:45 in the morning. It was on a Wednesday. I'll never forget it. I was sitting at a table, and I used to get up every morning and just write in a spiral notebook how I felt, what was going on around me, how I was feeling, how things were going. And this particular morning, I couldn't stop sobbing. And I can't imagine what a 290-pound man sitting in the middle of a rehab campus sobbing uncontrollably at a picnic table looks like. But that was me. I couldn't get a grip on myself. I couldn't get it under control. I remember thinking that if this is what being sober feels like, I don't want to have any part of it, because all the guilt and shame and the huge wake of destruction that I left back in Houston, I was having to deal with that for the first time sober in 20 plus years. And it was huge. It was huge. And it was like somebody came up behind me while all this was going on, while I was sobbing uncontrollably, having all these issues about everything that I'd done back home. It was like somebody came up behind me and draped a warm quilt around my shoulders. And I say quilt because I remember feeling weight and warmth on me. And it was like all those feelings and stuff were lifted off of me at that very second. And not only did I get the confidence that I could do this process, that I could stay another 90 days and get my life back, but I also realized that I had to make everything that I'd put everybody through all those years mean something. And I didn't know what at the time, but that was kind of the birth of Athletes in Recovery. Was, I still had a lot of work to do on myself, but I also knew that I had a lot of brothers that I played with and against who were out there and doing the same things I was doing and didn't know that there was a resource available, or for pride and ego, they also weren't putting up their hand and asking for help. So I knew I had a lot of work to do, and I wanted to help as many of these guys as I could. So, that was kind of the birth of Athletes in Recovery at that picnic table that morning.
And that's a huge segue. And let's talk about Pro Athletes in Recovery, because you went through this process, and it wasn't only about helping yourself. You now started a nonprofit to help others. And I think that's huge, Randy, right? Because it's one thing to do something for yourself. It's another thing to reach back and give back to others. And as you said, you knew other athletes were struggling with this same issue. And it's hard to ask for help. But the fact that you went through it, someone who's played the game, right? Someone that they could trust and confide in to really help them. I think that's huge, Randy. So I do commend you for starting this. I commend you for sharing this story. It's not hard for people to be vulnerable, Randy, right? A lot of us like to talk about the good times. Not a lot of us like to touch on the bad times, right? Especially if you go by people's social media, everyone's perfect, everyone's happy, but that's just not true, right? That's just not life. Let's talk about starting Pro Athletes in Recovery and just talk about this program.
There's so much stigma surrounding addiction and mental health issues. I feel like the more we talk about it, the easier it is to put your hand up and ask for help. But I knew that when my wife at the very end in 2009, she was willing to make one more call for me. And whoever she talked to in New York that day at the league office, they knew that there wasn't a resource for former players back then. There was nothing out there to help guys that were struggling with mental health and substance abuse issues. Right. So whoever she talked to that day in New York knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And that's how I got on that airplane that night to Florida. But that's what I wanted to create. I knew that there was no resources out there for the guys. I started talking to the NFL. We started the Player Care Foundation started right then. So we started working together with me and the Player Care Foundation. We started reaching out. There were 17,000 former NFL players out there, many of whom were struggling with substance abuse or self-medicating, traumatic brain injury or so many mental health issues with anger and depression and isolation. And all this was going on out there. So I started reaching out to as many guys as I could. We were doing as many screenings and getting in front of as many guys as we could. And next thing you know, over the course of 10 years, we've been able to help hundreds and hundreds of former NFL players and their families, but also Major League Baseball got involved and we're sending their former players, and NHL and NBA and then other former athlete groups like the Jockeys Guild and the Motorsports Safety Group and MMA and the PGA and LPGA. It's really just snowballed because regardless of what sport you play, we all have the same issues. And yeah, we all have chronic pain. We all leave the game with injuries. Right. But it's that transitional trauma that I talk about so much. And this applies to veterans, you know, that can't put on that uniform anymore. It applies to first responders that can't put on that uniform anymore when they don't have that locker room, you know, to hang out in. It applies to kids leaving college and can't find a job. It applies to broken marriages. You know, this transitional trauma is a real deal, and we as Americans don't do very well with change. And the first thing we start doing is self-medicating those feelings, you know, and then you wind up sleeping in the floor of a vacant house with no utilities, you know.
Wow, Randy. It's just, like you said, it's, again, I applaud you for sharing your story. I'm so thankful that you started this group and that it's expanded, right? Like you said, I mean, it doesn't matter the athlete or the sport. It's something that we all go through. You talked about veterans and so many others. That transitional trauma, I think, speaks to so many people out there in the listening audience. Right? I think it's just, again, magnificent that you expanded this program. You talked about all the people that you helped. And we also know that opioid addiction is still a problem in the United States, right? It's something that we're still battling, something that we're still trying to hopefully overcome. And you talk about just the National Football League and, you know, how the progress that they've made. You talked about when you started, it was nothing there for players, Randy, which is hard to even, you know, think about. Even now, I know we're trying to make progress. And to that point, Randy, do you feel like the National Football League and other sports leagues, to your knowledge, do you think we've made the right progress in terms of helping current and former athletes with mental health and any mental health needs? Or do you think, you know, so much more needs to be done? Do we need to get more funding to these programs so we can expand these programs to help more athletes?
Yeah, and I do think that it's come a long way. I think we have a long way to go. I'm proud of the work that we've done over the last 10, 11 years. You know, I think we've made the NFL more accountable in how they dispense and prescribe narcotics. I think they have to be more accountable to the DEA because, you know, we had, back when I played, it was that North Dallas 40 mentality. You know, we had an open drug safe in the middle of the training room. And if it ever was accidentally locked, we had 3 white guys that started on defense, and their jersey numbers were the combination to the safe the whole 10 years that I was there. So, you know, if you didn't get it from the doctors, you could just go get it yourself. And that kind of mentality doesn't exist anymore. But that's because of the advocating that we've done on behalf of players. And, you know, but that warrior mentality still exists, you know, with players. And if players don't put pressure on themselves to get back out on that field too soon, then coaches will, or the training room will, because that's their job, is to get you back on the field, or ownership or management. You know, there's always going to be pressure on players to get back in their position, probably sooner than they should. And that's the kind of thing that we try to get out and tell guys that it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to ask for help. And, you know, we want to do a better job where I wish the NFL would do a better job. And even the PA and the Alumni Association, all these groups, is helping guys transition out of the game. Because you know what? I thought I was ready for it. You know, I had all these great plans that I was going to do, and I was going to be glad I wasn't beating myself up every week. And, you know, life was going to be great when I didn't have to go to football and play football. But, man, when that uniform was taken away from me, I struggled, and I had no idea what to do next. Yeah. And I thought I was ready, you know?
Right. Until it really happens, sometimes you don't, Randy, right? You might think you have this plan, and then all of a sudden life happens. I think that's, like, again, what COVID did for most of us. Like, oh, I have no problem staying in my house, right, and working from home. And then it happens, and all of a sudden, you know, you're isolated. You can't connect with people in person. You're hopefully connecting through Zoom. Now it's been a year, which is crazy to think about almost, since COVID kind of first hit us and really we went on lockdown. It's not easy, Randy. I like what you said. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not ask for help. I think that's so powerful, powerful, powerful words for everybody out there, former athletes and just people in general. Please, 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 if you need help, seek it out. have loved ones that support you and just will be there for you no matter what. And I think, you talk about your strong wife and how her being there, meant so much to you and your family. And I think it's so great that they stuck with you every part of it, Randy.
And lately, even yesterday, I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of former Bucs. We were talking about the Vincent Jackson thing and, what could we have done better? And a couple of nights before that, I was asked to join a Zoom call with about 79 former University of Michigan players. And they have been getting together every week, every Tuesday night. They get together with this huge Zoom call, and they talk about how they're feeling. They talk about what they're going through. And it's amazing that even those guys, and a lot of them were my age or maybe just a few years younger, but they're still struggling with transitioning away from the game, transitioning, not being an athlete anymore, not having that camaraderie, that locker room, that I talk about. And it's a real deal. Transitional trauma is a real deal. And, they say you can trace trauma back to the beginning of everybody's addiction. Well, in my population, I can trace it back even further before that to a transitional issue. And, that's what I try to help guys reinvent themselves, to find purpose, to find their new tribe. And, people ask me all the time what I miss most about football, and it's not the game. I miss the locker room. And that's what recovery has given me back. The rooms of AA and NA are my new locker room, where I can be with like-minded people who have been to those deep, dark, ugly places that I've been. And, it's where I can collaborate and that's my community. That's my group there now,
It's so powerful. Randy Grimes, it's been such an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. Before I let you go, where can people find out more information? How can you help? Because after hearing the story, I know me and everybody else just wants to know, what can we do to help in this process, or any resources that you can give the listening audience?
Well, and you can find me on my website, which is Pro Athletes in Recovery, and that's proathletesinrecovery.org. Of course, randygrimespeaks.com. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, and Twitter at SoberCenter60. Hey, I've got a book coming out this summer. It's called Off Center. So be looking for that. Maybe I can come back on and we'll talk about the book.
Wonderful.
And you know what? The great thing about that book was I wanted to share my story, but as I was writing it, I included my family, and I let them have a platform in the book. And man, it was such a healing experience for the Grimes family. Even if the book is a flop, it was such a great deal for my family, and I'm grateful for that experience. But that's going to be coming out this summer. But hey, if you can't find me, you're not looking very hard, because I'm everywhere. White Sands Treatment Center in Tampa, Florida. Also, you can find me there. And, I'm grateful for the work that I'm able to do now. And I'm grateful for you for giving me this platform today.
I appreciate it, Randy. Again, I remember connecting with you a couple years back at Super Bowl. Lo and behold, of course, this year was much different. But again, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. Keep in touch and enjoy the sun and the palm trees and the water and everything else y'all have going on in West Palm Beach in Florida, Randy. Thank you so much for your time. You guys just heard from Randy Grimes, a former Tampa Bay Buccaneer and now the founder of Pro Athletes in Recovery. Thanks so much for your time, Randy. Have a great one.
So much. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Saturday. I'll let you guys get back to sports. We'll be back right here this coming Thursday at 6 p.m. with another special guest, and then back next Saturday at 2 p.m. Remember, these are Eastern time, so 6 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and again, so much more coming up. And also audio shows will be dropping Wednesday on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify with lots of great guests. Thanks, as always, for riding with me. Listening with KNN. We'll also have a very special debut launch of our merchandise coming this Wednesday, so stay tuned for that. So excited to release that. And again, thank you, everyone, for joining me. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe. Continue to wear your face mask, and I will see you on Thursday. Bye, guys.
Follow Kelsey on social media at The Real K Nelson. Catch episodes of Listen In with KNN on YouTube, on air at AM 1340 and 96.9 FM Fox Sports Radio, on Facebook and Twitter, and online at KelseyNicoleNelson.com. Thank you for watching this live stream broadcast of Listen In with KNN.
You used to hear me on your airwaves or hear me on my hit podcast, but now I'm taking you to the screen. You'll love Elevator Thoughts. We will talk the latest trending in sports. It's game time. What better way to get to know those that visit the show than over some good food and drink? It's time for confessions.